Good evening and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. A very special episode today. At the B20 Summit in Delhi, the Prime Minister spoke about the financial decarbonization program around the world, how that is important. Why? Because global warming is well and truly upon us. He spoke about green credits. He spoke about an accelerator fund which is also being looked at very, very closely indeed. On this program, the chairperson designate of the Confederation of Indian Industry, also the Dean of the School of Sustainable Development at Stanford University, as we look at this very important theme of climate change and what business can do to address the concerns.
वर्ल्ड में आजकल हम देखते हैं कि अपनी हेल्थ को लेकर सभी बहुत कॉन्शियस हो गए हैं। हेल्थ कॉन्शियसनेस डाइनिंग टेबल पर तो तुरंत दिखती है। जब हम कुछ खरीदते हैं, जो खाते हैं, जो काम करते हैं, हर चीज में ये जरूर देखते हैं कि इसका हेल्थ पर क्या प्रभाव पड़ेगा। हर कोई सोचता है कि कहीं मुझे तकलीफ तो नहीं हो जाएगी, लंबे समय मुझे मुश्किल तो नहीं हो जाएगी। हमें सिर्फ आज की चिंता नहीं होती, बल्कि ये भी सोचते हैं कि आगे चलकर भी इसका क्या प्रभाव होगा। मेरा मानना है यही सोच बिजनेस और सोसाइटी की प्लेनेट को लेकर के भी होनी चाहिए। फ्रेंड्स, ये प्रॉफिटेबल मार्केट कैन बी सस्टेन्ड व्हेन देयर इज ए बैलेंस इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ producers and consumers. This also applies to nations. Treating other countries only as a market will never work. It will harm even the producing countries sooner or later. Making everyone equal partners in progress is the way forward. There are many global business leaders here. Can we all give more thought to how to make business more consumer-centric? These consumers could be individuals or countries. Their interests need to be taken care of as well. Can we think of some sort of a yearly campaign for this? Every year, can global business come together to pledge themselves for the good of the consumers and their markets?
Well, with the B20 process wrapping up now, the focus really is on G20, what lies ahead. But I think in terms of the B20 process, it has been quite remarkable in terms of what was hoped the objectives would be, how India has a huge role going forward in meeting some of those objectives. We've got a fantastic guest with us, the Confederation of Indian Industries chairperson designate. He's also the chairperson of ITC. Thank you very much, Mr. Puri, for being with us. The Prime Minister spoke about green credits. How is that an important part of India's commitment to other G20 countries going forward to meet sustainable development goals?
Well, thank you, Vishnu, for having me here in your show. So I think it's extremely important because, so far, and that's what has emanated from the Western thinking, is primarily around decarbonization. Now, decarbonization is important, no doubt about it. But decarbonization, let us remember, is something that will benefit when temperatures start going down. And that's going to be some time away. For now, temperatures will go up. And we've seen how bad situation becomes just from 1.1 to 1.2, which we are now. And IPCC says will be 1.5 in the near term. So that aspect is, decarbonization is only one facet of it. We also need to look at nature. We need to look at adaptation, because we need to be able to carry on life with good success even as the temperature events become more frequent and more severe. So nature and nature positive is very important. The other bit is also that to do decarbonization in the absence of a sustainable lifestyle is also a suboptimal solution. And that's where I think the Prime Minister's program called LIFE it plays a very important role. So I think bringing in through this green credit, this whole concept about nature, the whole concept about a sustainable lifestyle, I think that was what was being looked at, right? And I think that's very important, and perhaps some facets of it even more important.
Absolutely. So how would financing decarbonization work? Because India has a huge stake in this process.
So it's a very important facet because we do need resources to be able to do it, and it's a very complex issue and an area where I think at a global level progress has not been adequate, because the West was also supposed to provide some resources to the global South, and what has come so far is meager. Right? Even the data I saw of 1920 on decarbonization, we need, it said 2 to 4 trillion per year.
Yes.
And for adaptation about 350 billion. What we got in 1 year was 650, I mean at a global level, out of which only 49 came to the adaptation. Now, so it is a problematic area. So what can be done is, to give you some ideas here, I think one is that half of those resources come from public resources, whether it's India or globally. I think we have to scale up availability of public resources, and I think the G20, one of the facets being looked at is how to enhance the role of multilateral development organizations. I think there the resources need to be enhanced. So that is, I think, one important area. As far as private capital is concerned, now roughly about 40% or so, or maybe between 35 to 40 comes from private sources. So private capital can come on an accelerated fashion based on economic returns. And how do you get economic returns? There are some areas where economic viability is there, but there may be some friction in the regulation that is bringing some additional costs to it.
Sure.
So if you can deal with that, that is one facet. There are other areas where viable technology is not there. So that's an area for public-private partnership to really develop technology that is accessible. I think that will also, once it is accessible and there's a return on it, and every company today knows they have to go that path. There is no choice. So once the economics become right, I think the adoption is going to be faster, and it will unlock a lot more private funds into it. So both these facets, I think, are the areas that can come in.
So the Sustainable Development Goals Acceleration Fund is what you were referring to, essentially.
So that's another part of it. I am sorry I missed saying that.
Yes.
Thank you for pointing that out. One is the role of multilateral institutions. That is also one of the points that is been reported in the media for G2. I think what was spoken about today, the SDGs Acceleration Fund, that's another great idea where both private capital and public capital can come together and create a corpus for investment.
Right. Just one or two questions more. I know you're hard pressed for time. India has a wonderful program of digitalization that's defined many aspects of our future economic growth, even present. Is that something that can be replicated elsewhere? Is there interest among B20 nations, G20 nations in replicating parts of that?
I believe there is tremendous interest, and I can say so based on my own interactions also. I think the manner in which this digital public infrastructure has empowered the economy, both for creating business ecosystems as also providing welfare to those who need it. I think that point is well appreciated, and it's a system which is efficient. The costs in the system are minimal. I think it's definitely the way to go, particularly for emerging and developing economies. It would be, I think, it would bring great value to the economy, and India is a testament to that. India's growth that we are seeing through economic progress is also contributed by the development that has happened on account of this whole ecosystem.
A final question on financial inclusion, which is really what it's all about. India has a very rich demographic dividend right now. We are the world's most populous nation, a very young workforce as well. But in order to meet our future aspirations, we need to bring in more women into the workforce. Therefore, when one speaks about financial inclusion, it is to a very large extent about getting women into the workforce. Could you tell us a little bit about how that is an essential goal?
It is definitely an essential goal, and in the recent past we have seen greater attention to this subject in India, and we are seeing progress. And I will say so for my own company also. We are now paying a lot more attention to this area, and systematically we have to deal with the issue, and as we are dealing with it systematically, we are also seeing progress. And this whole issue about financial inclusion is certainly on the gender side is one, but I think the whole pot has to be expanded also, because even irrespective of the gender, there are many more who need to be brought into the to be provided good quality of jobs.
Yes.
Right? And I think this is India's moment. The whole world is looking at India for its domestic market, an opportunity to use this as a hub for other markets, for manufacturing, for services, and that's where our demographic dividend can really be leveraged. This is the opportunity, and in the new world order also, I think there are more greater amount of interest. So we have to create and expand the economic pot so that we create more opportunities for everybody.
So wonderful speaking to you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
indeed. Well, Mr. Puri over there telling us a little bit about sustainable development goals going forward, what India's strategy is, what some of the B20 outcomes are, and financial inclusion, what it really entails. It's been a fairly remarkable B20 process. Will some of the goals which we've looked at over here be translated into real results? Well, the entire issue of climate has been one that's really dominated the B20 process, and when one looks at climate and one looks at B20, there's the entire issue of financing decarbonization, the transfer of green technology, the entire issue of who actually pays for it. It's also about upskilling and reskilling businesses around the world to ensure that when one speaks about sustainable environmental growth, that these are matched by actual practices on the ground, because if that doesn't happen, this is just a talk shop, which is what we don't want it to be. We've got a wonderful guest with us. Dr. Orunava Mojumdar is Dean of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. You were there, when the Prime Minister spoke, and he spoke about green credits. We've seen carbon credits in the past. Now he's referred to green credits. How is this possibly an important suggestion?
Vishnu, thank you for having me on your show. First of all, I must say that a very impressive speech by the Prime Minister, very inspiring and energetic. I think one has to look at it, step back from some of the details and ask the question, how big a transition is this? This is the biggest transition humanity has ever done, because you're changing from a 20th century economy that is based on fossil fuels, that is leading to climate change, burning of fossil fuel, to something that is a clean economy. And given the scale of the population that we have and the scale of a $100 trillion global economy, this is the biggest change we've ever seen. So in this process, one has to incentivize and reinforce the right steps one has to take, and penalize some of the wrong steps that people will take. What the Prime Minister is saying, green credits, is like, let's reinforce the right behavior. And that is going green, that is going renewables, that is going carbon-free. And I think that's what he's trying to say. And this is a step in the right direction, because it incentivizes, it promotes and reinforces the right kind of behavior. That's what he's saying. Yeah. But I think this one has to step back and look at the biggest transition humanity has ever done.
Right.
And this will change, this will affect every human being.
Yeah.
And it's not just about decarbonization, it is about adaptation.
Yeah.
And because climate change is here.
Yeah.
People out in the global south feel it much more in the heat waves and the humidity waves, loss of agriculture and all of that. Given all of that, the adaptation, the food security, the water security, the heat security, etc., these are very, very important issues in addition to the decarbonization.
India seems to be doing reasonably well in meeting, our goals towards Paris. In terms of solar, we've gone far ahead than what many had projected a few years back. There is active talk on, let's say, green hydrogen as well. So in terms of what India's stated goals are, and they're ahead of what many countries are presently, are you encouraged by the process?
I'm encouraged by a lot of things going on out here. First of all, the landing on the moon, as someone who was born and brought up out here, went through high school and college and everything, it just makes all of us feel so proud of the fact that it landed on the south pole of the moon. But I said this on stage yesterday as well. If you go back in history and ask the question, what happened in the United States when President Kennedy in 1962 went, we chose to go to the moon and return safely? It was obviously they landed on the moon and came back, but in addition to that, there were a lot of other innovation that happened around the same time. Lasers got invented, wireless communication, cellular communication, Bell Laboratories, with DARPA, internet got invented, network distributed computing. All of that happened at the same time. So it was intensity and innovation that happened. And I think we are seeing the early days of the landing on the moon as a signature of a larger innovation play that India is going into. And I think it's just heartwarming to see that because the potential of the capacity of the people out here and the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that is in place, I think now we can build on that. And I think India is showing the way in many ways.
A couple of points about cutting down on carbon emissions. There's batteries, and batteries are so important in terms of electric mobility. But the cost of batteries is still far too expensive, not just in India, but around the world, number one. Number two, we talk about green hydrogen, but it's extremely expensive, and there's the entire issue of safety as well. And so there's an interim solution, which is blended fuels. And I know I'm mixing up a lot of key technologies over here, but what in your mind is the roadmap to sort of getting this done?
So first of all, I think every country will start from a different initial condition. We'll have different boundary conditions. So every country has to chart its own path. India will chart its own path. And the transition to electrification is a multiple play. It's air pollution. It is getting away from foreign oil imports. I mean, there's a lot of play out here. And I think, the battery costs are high, but they're coming down. They've come down a lot, more than people had expected 10 years ago. And so now, with the batteries coming down, in a few years, we can expect the range and the cost of electric vehicles to be competitive and maybe even lower than the gasoline or petroleum-based cars, right? And so, and it's much easier to drive, it's lower maintenance. So I think there are a lot of benefits that will come out of the electrification of transportation, and at least the light-duty transportation. The heavy duty is a different ballgame, right? In terms of fuel, yes, hydrogen, first of all, in addition to electricity, you need a fuel. The economy cannot do without a fuel. And so the fuel out here, in this case, is either coal or hydrogen. Hydrogen can be produced from electricity, right? Or hydrogen can be produced from other means. The carbon footprint of that is very important. And the cost, as you pointed out, is really important because it is more expensive to split water and produce hydrogen. So that requires incentives. The United States has created the Inflation Reduction Act that provides incentives to create more technology to bring down the cost. And that is what is needed. It is about scale. And as you scale more, the learning curves will happen and the cost will come down. So that's the direction that all countries should be going, and India is certainly going in that direction.
We need to skill and reskill to meet sustainable development targets, right? I mean, jobs have to keep the environment in mind, the climate in mind. Is that not an essential part of the way forward?
Absolutely. In fact, when I would say this is such a big transition in the economy that new educational modes are needed, new skill sets are needed. And if you don't have the workforce, it's going to be a huge problem. So I think in addition to the technology, in addition to the financing that you pointed out, I think workforce development, fundamental education in what issues related to the new economy, whether it's clean economy, green or water purification or agricultural practices, all of these, the education is needed. And I'm in an educational institution. So our goal is to develop that education system not only for our own students, we're going to make it available for free for the rest of the world. Because we think that that is a fundamental need for all societies.
When we began this interview, you spoke about extreme events. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because we've just gone through the hottest July and possibly the hottest August as well, the hottest June and certainly the hottest July. Right. We've gone through floods in India in just the last couple of weeks. We've had extreme weather patterns in the Arabian Sea and cyclones of much greater intensity than in the past. And we've gone through drought in some areas, or almost drought in some areas, and too much rainfall in others. What is this all a part of?
Well, this is about climate change. Climate change is not in the future, it's here. And it is likely to get worse. This is not going to get better. So I think you're exactly right. The global south will face more of these extreme events than the global north.
Yeah.
It's just because we are in the tropics out here. And I think one has to look at that very carefully, as the Prime Minister talked about, that in addition to the decarbonization of our economy, that's a business opportunity that needs to be done, but it's not an either or.
Right.
In addition to that, in parallel, we need to look at adaptation.
Sure.
We need to look at financing homes that are more resilient, right? If 8% of the Indian population has access to air conditioning, 8%. When you have a heat and humidity wave, that people will die if you don't have the right kind of housing or right kind of, maybe there's a warehouse that is air conditioned so that when the heat and humidity wave happens, they can come there and assemble and get through this, ride through these events that are happening. There are sea level rises, and there are a lot of people who live in the coastal communities. It's not just fisheries going away.
No.
It is actually the sea level rise can happen, especially during hurricanes and cyclones and all of that. And so all of that needs to be the adaptation of food. When the temperature goes up, the food productivity goes down. Right? And then the preservation of food, the supply chains of food, water, drought issues. So all of these have to be addressed in a systemic way, so that the people, at the end of the day, our communities need to be safe.
Sure. Professor Majumdar, wonderful speaking to you. Thank you so much indeed. Well, there you have it. A look at what B20 really needs to focus on. Climate change is upon us. We see this on a very regular basis. The entire issue of who finances decarbonization around the world, the adoption of new technologies, meeting targets which have been set up internationally. Because if we don't do this now, then it's becoming much, much harder for all of us, billions across the world.
We're at the B20 Summit, and of course we've got a whole host of global voices for you. Now joining us for an exclusive interview and an interaction is Mr. Johnny Taylor, who is of course the President and CEO of SHRM. He's also looking at it very closely, areas of future skill development and mobility, and the future of work essentially at the B20. Thank you for your time and this interaction.
Thank you
and
for
I'd
having
like to
me.
begin by asking you, of course, the global workspace is changing completely. The landscape is changing altogether.
Yes.
Right? We have generative AI coming in.
Yes.
We have all the experts telling us, from India Inc. to global leaders, that look, it is time to reskill.
Yes.
So your thoughts on how we can really implement all of this and not just discuss it in terms of policy measures?
Yeah, the implementation is the key, right? We first have to start with great policy. Governments around the world, and I was very, very honored to be a part of meetings yesterday with your government here, have got to focus on workplace policy. It's not enough to say that people need to be reskilled if in fact we don't put in place a mechanism for them to be reskilled, which means access, affordability, and high quality skills achievement, right? Secondly though, we've got to be very intentional about an aging workforce around the globe. India is quite fortunate in that you are growing at 14 million people per year, I understand, and therefore you're going to be net a supplier of talent to the world. But it's not enough to have young people who don't have the talented skills that we need. So skills development, once again, reskilling is essential for mobility to work. The future of work has changed so significantly over the last 3 years, post-pandemic, right? That's been the big shift. How people work, where they work, for whom they will work, when they work, has all overnight been disrupted, and we're trying to figure it out.
All right, so we're still trying to figure that out.
That's right.
But I'd like to elaborate on the mechanism really.
Yes.
Because that is key, like you said.
Yes.
We need to have the mechanism in place to skill people.
Right.
So how do you think, what can be the first step globally that we must look at?
Globally, we've got to change the narrative about going to school, obtaining a degree, or gathering skills and keeping those for 20 or 30 years. world of work is changing and shifting so rapidly that many of the jobs that you know of today, 5 years from now, won't exist. So this idea of lifelong learning has become the new way that we have to think as governments, as industry, and as citizens, is you are constantly being expected to upskill and reskill. The second big takeaway in terms of actually taking this at play is we've got to get this into secondary education much earlier. We cannot wait until people get to college to teach them the skills so that they can come into the workplace. We've got to start much earlier, 10, 11, 12 years old, giving students the types of skills that the workforce is going to demand 5, 7 years later in their lives. But here's one that a lot of people aren't talking about: older workers. It's not enough just to educate and retrain and reskill 12-year-olds and 18-year-olds. We've now got to invest in 40-year-olds globally because the globe is getting older. Our country, the world, in fact, is graying and browning at once. And so the whole idea of what we must do to provide training for people outside of your prime 19 to 25 years old is critical. That is what governments are going to have to invest in.
Thank you so much for this interaction and your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.